and a lot of, I think, busy tourism. The numbers, people seem to be out and about. We came off that really hot, humid heat wave. Things finally started to cool off over the weekend. Today, we do have some clouds, much cooler than what we're used to just 3 or 4 days ago. It's going to feel like fall. No, I'm kidding. 70 about right now. You just heard Mike Pomp go through the our forecast. Hazy, cloudy, some rain later on today into tomorrow. So hazy, cloudy, and cooler, about 70. J Dog, our poll question up on X this morning at the Pulse of an H on this Monday morning. And thank you for joining us here locally, regionally, nationally, and worldwide. Hey, Alexa, hey, Google, play the Pulse of an H. And we're also streaming on YouTube if you want to watch the show in the first hour at the Pulse of an H. J Dog, our poll question this morning, thanks to our friends at R&D Pavers, has to do with the World Cup tonight. Big game, USA, the Team USA or US, Belgium, and a star player for the U.S. FIFA, very much in the news this morning, got the red card for supposedly stepping on an opponent's ankle in the last game. That means a one-game suspension. I guess the president spoke to the head or pleaded with the head of FIFA to let him play, suspend that. They did. Now this morning, Belgium is protesting that. J-Dog, this is kind of a sideshow going into the game now.
Well, what did you expect?
I don't know. I mean, you can't, I guess you can't blame us for trying to get the guy to play, and you can't blame Belgium for protesting, right?
Just leave well enough alone. Serve the suspension, right? It's a one-match suspension.
Okay.
Wrong? Probably. But guess what?
But now FIFA's complicated because by acquiescing to lift it, that was the news coming out of last night that he's going to play. And now, of course, it's back. We'll see where it goes. I guess what they asked both Belgium and the U.S. to kind of file their final, appeals. So probably I would think by midday you'd have to announce that because you're going to mess up a team trying to plan just the rotation, the flow, and starting lineup. So we'll see. All right. Hey, by the way, J-Dog, because I know Concord had their big stuff. Did you have a good overall? Did you take part? Did you go down? How was the parade and all that?
Again, as you know, Concord is not a big city, so the parade is not very long. So CJ and I, though, I tell you, CJ is the master of cranking the music up to 15, not 11, 15. I can barely hear myself.
Yeah, checked out your ears. Hey, by the way, law enforcement locally and Attorney General's office quite busy this morning, unfortunately. It's not similar situations, but in Peterborough, one man found dead, another injured this morning. They're investigating that. And then Hampton, I guess it ended in Hampton Beach with a young person taking their own life after some people were shot or shooting. And it's just kind of a, bad stuff and sad story. But Attorney General's office and law enforcement busy this morning, both in Peterborough and Hampton Beach, coming out of the July 4th weekend. So some of the other side stories or news stories going on as we get going. We're going to hear this morning from some of our regular contributors. Dean Spiliota, Southern New Hampshire University, will be coming up in a little bit. And I do think July 4th fortunately dominated much of the news flow over the weekend. I mean, a lot of people were on vacation actually this week, kind of butts up against the Saturday, July 4th, or people were off last week. So people are getting into the summer mode literally now that we're into summer. But we had so Dean Spiliota will come on and talk about, whether it's more midterm news, some national polls are out. It's hard to tell, but things should be starting to gear up or crank up here. But we had Stephen Junot on the show last Thursday, an extended live, really exclusive interview. He's one of the senior global economists for global research for all of Bank of America, one of our great backbone sponsors and partners in this show, my show, Good Morning New Hampshire, the Pulse of an Age. And Stephen, Thursday going into the July 4th weekend, and we'll get some reaction this morning from some of our regular contributors, including Doug Tengden, I believe, in this hour. Stephen's the global economist, and I don't know if it's all because of the war with and in Iran, or if it has to do with other forces, but certainly the global impact and the spike in energy prices, oil prices with the war in Iran and the Strait of Hormuz really did, obviously rock the apple cart, even though I noticed this morning coming in this morning, you do see gas prices dropping, and they're going to continue to drop because there's a time period there. Even though the president was talking about stations and people, don't gouge. It takes time, got to remember all those stations that we see locally to fill up. They already have the fuel in the ground. They bought it at higher prices. And until that is depleted and they buy more and restock, you won't see a drop. But I did see this morning, something down to, it's like $3.50, depending on where you get your gas. But Stevens, on Thursday's show, it struck me, that interview, because he's painting a picture which is a lot different than how we kind of ended last year and began this year. And at this sort of July 4th is always a good juncture to look at the where the economy's at, because we don't have that much to, you can see the end of the year, which we don't want to rush, but you can see that at the end of the year, even though we're just beginning summer. And he painted a picture of the Federal Reserve, even with the new chairman, because of inflation. I'm going to repeat that, because of inflation running, about twice as high as they want, over 4% or 4% versus that 2 point whatever percent. He said, and I don't know if this will happen, but he certainly knows more than me on this. He's the senior economist. He said that he thinks the Federal Reserve will raise interest rates 3 times by the end of this year, 0.25% each time, so 0.75%. And that admittedly will stifle or put some cold water on spending, because it's going to choke some of that consumer borrowing and spending. And so it's going to, like the housing market. We already have a very expensive housing market here locally. We all know that. Very expensive. There have been studies and reports that, 80% of New Hampshire, for example, homeowners, if they had to buy the same home they're in right now and today's cost of everything, if they have to rebuy their home today, they're like 80% of New Hampshire could not afford to do that. And about the same percentage, different studies like Wallet Hub or Invested Capital have done studies that you'd almost have to be grossing $215,000 a year to afford a medium home price in New Hampshire right now, with the cost of everything else, groceries, energy, of course, coming off the heat wave. You're going to see, your electricity, everything's expensive. So Stevens said they're going to raise interest rates by the end of the year to stifle inflation, to cool it off, and that's going to affect things like borrowing. That affects borrowing. That affects the mortgage rate. That affects the housing market. So it just feels like we're in this. He did not, by the way, and we'll see if Doug Tengden concurs, he did not mention the R word. Stephen did not even mention or come close to it. So just somewhat of a slower end of the year than they had forecasted. He still sees high-tech sector pulling ahead with all the big money on things like AI investments, even though that sounds like the big boys, the big companies, the big players, the big gals, I'm talking like Amazon, Google, Microsoft, all the big players, Dell, they're all in on AI investments. That's all there, but it's when you're beginning your day and you're looking at paying bills and groceries and everything else, it doesn't matter if to you directly, even if you indirectly benefit, if NVIDIA sets a record high in the market, you're like, it doesn't help me pay my bills. So Stephen forecasted some interest rate hikes, which would cool things off. And that's the goal of the Fed by the end of the year. And that was something I didn't expect, but he did not mention anything close to the R word. And of course, these economic discussions do impact politics in the midterms. We're going into that before you know it, this fall. And that will determine things in like Washington, the House. If Democrats were to win the House right now, there's a very, very, very small House, Republican majority, more in the Senate, but there's even reports that depending on if the wave is more blue than light blue this fall, it could even put the U.S. Senate in play. And then, of course, you have things here in New Hampshire where we have this split between independent voters recently favoring Democrats in federal offices, and we have that wide open U.S. Senate race, and Republicans controlling things in Concord at the Capitol, the State House, the governor's office, the state Senate. Will that continue? So we're going to hear from some of our contributors this morning, including Anna Brown, Citizens Count. We'll have our regular, we're also in the 11 o'clock hour. We have a great guest on prescription drug prices. And why don't they ever come down? Hey, Google. Hey, Alexa. Play the Pulse of an H. We'll take a quick break on this Monday. Hope you had a great 4th and celebrating 250. And I enjoyed last week. Sue Polidor, thank you. A belated thank you. Really fun to get all the history on New Hampshire in starting the Friday before and then through last week. Just great Independence Day history unique to New Hampshire. So that was really cool. Hey, Google, hey, let's play the Pulse of an H. Back with Dean next.
Register now for the Pulse of New Hampshire.
To Jack Heath on the Pulse of New Hampshire.
All right. And we'll, J-Dog 935, we'll get a live report out of Hampton Beach. Sort of wrapping up July 4th. Busy time, really starting the heat wave on Thursday and Friday. Thankfully, they fixed that mess down in Haverhill, Mass. As I go into Dean Spiliotis, retired Southern New Hampshire University political scientist, great political contributor and part of our show. Good morning, Dean. Hope you had a good 4th.
Hi, good morning, Jack. Yes, indeed. Did all the things you like to do, grilling, fireworks, a little bit of crazy weather, but yeah, overall good weekend.
I wasn't. Thank you. I'm glad to hear that, and I hope everyone else, most people out there, are the same. I wasn't going to go here, and truth be told, I didn't even watch the official July 4th stuff out of DC and all that because I was sort of remote and I was just doing the local thing. So I wasn't watching a flat screen. But I just do have to chuckle this morning because I know it's just noise, but the New York Times opinion writer, I guess she said President Trump ruined the 4th for her. Too much red, white, and blue. Combined, too many flags, too much red, white, and blue, too over the top. And okay. But my point is, I maybe she doesn't like the term God and independence, but I just have to laugh that you can't even, I know that it was a record number of 800. I don't know how many fireworks. It was some record number. Are we surprised? But even the July 4th has to get political, I guess, in some respects.
Yeah, I mean, it most definitely has become politicized in a way that it once, really wasn't. I think the reality is most people, in my experience as well, is most people like you were doing things locally in their communities, parades, getting together with friends and barbecuing, et cetera, maybe doing swimming or doing some other kind of outdoor event. So the kind of national celebration, that's really something that mainly political elites and people who are very online tend to focus on. I have not read that particular op-ed. President Trump didn't come on until after 11 p.m. because of a weather delay. So I have not seen his full 40-minute speech. I saw clips of it. President Trump's aesthetic has always been more is better, whether it's flags or bunting or what have you. And so there were a lot of artifacts, et cetera. Some people took issue with him going after Democrats as, godless communists. And he had a few other, he talked a little bit about, a little bit of election denialism and saying he might run for a third term. He kind of threw in a little bit of red meat there, but mainly it was a fairly traditional. From the clips that I watched, it was
right.
A fairly traditional speech. But yeah, the fireworks was something like 850,000 individual charges. And friends of mine who live in D.C. sent me a picture of the mall in the morning, and it was just like a haze, like a fog, still hanging from all of that fireworks.
A lot of gunpowder.
Haze.
A lot of gunpowder.
Yep.
Hey, Dean, what's interesting? There was a story this morning, Speaker Johnson still talking about the SAVE Act. And even if he gets it through, the threshold in the Senate, it would take 7 Democrats to cross over in terms of the voting, the SAVE Act. And the president keeps pushing it symbolically, which I get, probably trying to make it a campaign issue this fall. But it's not going to pass. And it's just interesting. Right. The president keeps pushing that. And I don't know if he signed the housing bill yet, which he called the big yawn.
I don't think he did. No, I don't think he has signed.
Which I don't understand why. They're really too unrelated. I know in Washington they'll sometimes use one to leverage another, but you just think there's only upside for him signing it, even if it's quietly, because you're just giving Democrats ammo this fall with affordable housing crisis in places like here. If you don't pass something to address, more affordable housing. So I don't understand some of that, but that's again, President Trump is President Trump. He's not going to change.
Yeah, and in fact, now that you mentioned it, I did see clips where he mentioned the SAVE Act, and I think he also mentioned ending the filibuster in the Senate. The housing bill, my understanding is, once the Speaker sends it over to the White House, which he's done, it starts a 10-day clock, and that can affect it, basically become law without the president signing it. There are some circumstances under which it can be vetoed without actually formally vetoing it. But as you mentioned, he missed. This is something that his caucus in both chambers wanted to run on. So they may still get to run on the policy, but it won't get the same kind of play that it might have. In the SAVE Act, it just does not seem like he's going to be able to get that in Congress. They're not going to do away with a filibuster in the Senate because Republicans know at some point there's going to be a Democratic majority at some day in the future, and they don't want to set that up. And so it's just not likely to happen. They may try to. There's some talk about maybe attaching it to another budget reconciliation package. But in the end, Jack, this is going to run into a lot of court challenges, even if it were to pass.
But even if it passed the House, it's got to pass the Senate.
Right.
And I don't see 7 Democrats voting for it.
No.
The other thing is John Decker, our own White House correspondent, is in Turkey for the 2026 NATO summit, which is underway this week, which is big stuff, obviously, given what's going on with the war in Ukraine and the NATO nations and Putin and his, fierce, dislike of NATO. I guess the question is, you mentioned that clock ticking on the housing bill. So the president, when does that clock, when are those 11 days up, and will he be gone? I mean, I guess he can sign, he could even sign this on Air Force One or in Turkey, I imagine, right?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I don't remember. I know that Speaker Johnson did transmit it to the White House. There was some question about whether he was if and when he would do that. So I'm not sure exactly when the clock runs out, but he has the option of he can sign it. He can sign it pretty much anywhere. That's pretty easy to do. And the NATO summit's going to be really interesting because he's had such a rocky relationship with NATO. Particularly lately, the German leader, the Italian leader. So it's going to be interesting. And he's going to meet with President Zelensky again. Ukraine has been more aggressive in attacking Russia across the border, but Russia has also had a couple of big strikes recently with dozens of people killed in Ukraine. So we'll see how President Trump interacts with Zelensky this time when they meet.
Right. And then the final one, Dean Spiliotis, retired Southern New Hampshire University political science professor. That's a mouthful, but I love saying it.
I love hearing it, Jack.
Dean, there you go. So there's been this 6-day kind of state funeral in the Islamic State of the Ayatollah, the senior, and 4 family members. It's been going on for, I guess, more than 5 days. And we still don't really know where things ultimately between the U.S. and Iran are going to go in terms of the nuclear agreement that can be verified and solid, as well as ultimately, I guess, the war itself. And so is it just sort of feel like it's on pause a little bit, or the World Cup soccer is coming to a head here? I mean, I don't know. It's just sometimes these things take a life of their own.
Yeah, I think that from the Trump administration's perspective, gas prices have eased, I think, enough where they feel like that they can kind of get it off of the front burner in the sense of all the coverage and the sort of day-to-day commentary by President Trump. But we're going to hit that 60-day deadline at some point, in the future, and they may have to extend that. But all the other, I think it seems like we're just going to have this sort of ongoing low-level tit-for-tat around control of the Strait of Hormuz without any sort of final resolution, at least in the near term, is my sense.
All right, Dean, make it a good Monday, hazy and cloudy and all. Thank you, Dean.
That's right. Thanks, Jack.
All right, we come back. Alicia Preston-Xanthopoulos, Seacoast Online, get a live update from Hampton Beach after several days of the heat wave and crowds and a big July 4th. Back in a moment.
This is the Pulse of New
All right, welcome to Monday. You know, this, as I said earlier, a lot of people are sort of taking a day or two after the 4th, so maybe off today or before last week. But overall, it felt like a big July 4th weekend regionally and locally. Certainly the traffic patterns bared that. You know, 93, 95, Hampton, 16, Spalding, a lot of people going to and from and visiting our great state. And I hope they enjoyed on the digital electronic highway signs, live free or die. Happy July, happy 4th, live free or die. Thank you. I love that. But Hampton Beach, no doubt, had to be one of the busiest places per capita, especially with coming off the heat wave, which really had stayed hot into Saturday. Let's be honest. Let's be candid. And there is a unfortunate police matter of that shooting, which culminated at Hampton Beach with a young person taking their own life after apparently a couple of other people shot. But I mean, overall, unfortunately, the mess in Haverhill, Mass was taken care of last Wednesday night. Hopefully that, but I'm sure with the heat, Hampton Beach was packed. And of course, the fireworks, and none other than, and no one better than Alicia Preston-Xanthopoulos, APX Seacoast Online, to give us a complete, full, patriotic red, white, and blue update on Hampton Beach, July 4th, 250. Good morning.
Good morning. Happy belated 4th to you.
Thank you. Well, tell us.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't venture out until yesterday afternoon because I hosted about 7 young people for a barbecue Saturday that lasted well into Sunday, which was great. But we did have an unfortunate incident, obviously, overnight on the 4th. And a 21-year-old from South Carolina is dead. 2 people are in the hospital. That's horrible. It's awful. But, that didn't define all that happened in Hampton Beach in the 4th of July weekend. I went out yesterday afternoon for a bit. Needed to get my fried food fix. It was great. People were happy. The place was packed. And people were just enjoying, the festivities that are the 4th of July and coming together.
Did you from like Thursday, Friday night with the hot, humid weather into Saturday fireworks? Did you get any, if you heard any local head count on how many people came in there from Thursday through the weekend?
I haven't heard anything official. I asked a friend of mine when I was at his restaurant yesterday afternoon how good he was hearing it was. And he said it was so far the reports from his buddies' home places it was a very good weekend.
Well, I'm wondering I can't imagine one where it was ever busier, because even with the seafood and the festivals and the chowders, but I mean, when you get that hot, and it was hot Thursday, Friday, going into the weekend, wherever you were, into the, like real feel 100. And then regardless of the beaches opening down in Mass or not, that folks from like that Haverhill, Lawrence, Lowell and beyond are going to come up to Hampton Beach. I imagine, I'd like to know a number. The Hampton police must be exhausted. The lifeguards must be exhausted. It must have been packed. I mean, I'm going to be surprised if 250,000 people were over there.
Yeah, I'm sure the police generally, someone will release numbers, maybe the Chamber of Commerce at some point, approximate head counts, and I think it's going to be high. Like I said, I did not leave my house from Friday night till Sunday afternoon because it was too hot, and I knew it would be wild and crazy out there. But every report I've heard is that it was a very solid weekend for businesses, a very good 4th, and the pictures of the beaches, they're full, of course.
Yeah.
People come from cities to get cool air and to get the ocean.
Yeah, especially when it's 102 degrees in Nashua. Yeah. So if you now in Rye, they have their own parking space scandal or controversy now. The state removed all the ones that the local folks wanted to have less parking. But what about Hampton Beach? I mean, good luck getting a parking space over the weekend, right?
Well, we have a lot of, in addition to the state parking, there's municipal parking lots, and then there's several private parking spots, parking lots for people to park in. Normally, I'll see a flood on social media of people unable to park or complaining about the private pricing. But I didn't see a lot this time. I think maybe the prices were tempered a little because of backlash in the past. But
how much was it? Like if you were going to park on someone's lawn, what were they charging for a day?
On a lawn, I'm not sure. Private parking lots, the highest I saw was 60, which may sound a lot.
60?
But in years past, 60. Yeah. But in years past, it's been as high as 100. So, and I don't know if that existed, but I didn't see any of that.
Well, you know what? Hey, you can enjoy the beach all day. You go down to a Fenway Park in those private spaces. They're probably over $100 now. Of
course.
All right. So have you resolved, because you're a World Cup soccer fan, and I do have to concede or agree. I think this has been much bigger and more successful in these major U.S. cities than I had pre-thought. And I think the things I did not understand, but I think it's even more gratifying, is how many, not just the Tartan Army from Scotland, but how many folks came from other countries with maybe a little bit of a cynical view of America and have had absolute blast and love America. And it's great to see that. But this controversy tonight, is the star player going to play? Because it's probably going to become a distraction. I don't think it's actually good for the U.S. team to have a distraction. But Belgium, the red card controversy, FIFA lifted it over the weekend when the president reached out to the head of FIFA. Now they're talking about Belgium. They filed a protest. So what's the deal? Have you resolved the red card FIFA lifting of the suspension, 1 match suspension, or maybe putting it back in? What's the net on this one?
It's not resolved yet. There's allegedly and reportedly a member of the appeal board from FIFA that is not part of either the European Union or any of the Americas, so is not going to have a bias that'll decide whether to reinstitute the punishment. Here's the problem, Jack. And I said it yesterday on Facebook, I have been saying this for years. My husband's saying it for years. Anyone who follows international soccer of any kind knows it as a fact, not an opinion, that FIFA is the most corrupt organization in the entire world. Period. End of story. They are. And we saw it in Qatar. We saw it 4 years before that. They are corrupt. I mean, people go to jail every 4 years for taking envelopes because they're corrupt. So, look, I believe that red card was a red card. A lot of people are saying, but it wasn't deliberate. Just for clarity, it does not have to be deliberate because it's a red card. However, let's say it's not. I'm not the referee in the field. I'm not the referee in the VAR booth. The ones that are made a decision. For the president to call the president of FIFA, and the FIFA president to listen, and not, mind you, this has not been done in 6 years. They didn't change the red card. They let the red card stand. They changed the punishment. They simply removed the punishment, which is worse than if they had rescinded the red card, because they are acknowledging the red card stand. They're just saying, we're going to take away the suspension. That's part of the rules. And what's going to happen is, look, tonight should be a good game, with or without Belgium on the field. It should be a solid matchup, and I hope the U.S. wins. However, if he takes the field and we win, there's an asterisk for the United States on this entire World Cup because of this happening. It is outrageous. It should not happen.
Yeah, I was kind of surprised over the weekend when it was lifted. I mean, as J-Dog said, 1 match suspension, 1 match. I mean, the rules are the rules. But the other problem, too, is not to sound like I just ironically last night when I was looking for something to fill an hour and just, kind of before you retire, as they say, I was watching the great Miracle on Ice with Kurt Russell playing Herb Brooks and the hockey. And when you're going into a match like this, and J-Dog said earlier, was it how many years since they've gone, if they win tonight against Belgium, this is great territory for the U.S. I mean, this is big stage.
Yeah.
When you have a team and you're looking at chemistry, flow, focus, starting lineup, having a star player in limbo like this, it just is not a great distraction for your own team.
Yeah, no, of course it's not. It's a terrible situation, and I understand he wants to play, and I understand he is fantastic on our team. But fairness is fairness, and that fairness was taken away by this little stunt. And I don't even blame Donald Trump. I mean, if he wants to make a call, fine. I blame FIFA, who's supposed to say no, and they didn't, because they're corrupt. And they'll always be corrupt, and they've always been corrupt, and I have no idea why I ever get surprised. I really don't, but here we are. I mean, all you have to do is look at the Portugal-Croatia game the other day, and there was this ridiculous pullback on an offside that never happened. But why did that happen? And I'm laughing, and a friend of mine's husband's texting me. He's like, why'd that happen? And I said, Portugal's got to go through. They sell more merchandise in Croatia.
Yeah.
It's so blanket in front of our faces. It's ridiculous.
What time is the game with Belgium tonight?
8:00 tonight.
All right. Hey, enjoy it. Thank you, APX. Stay cool. Well, you don't have to worry about staying cool. All right. Thank you. Only 70 for a high right now, or at least today. Hazy, cloudy, maybe some rain, some rain later this afternoon, tonight, and tomorrow. I want to take a moment before we go to break. We'll have Doug Tengden in a moment. I'll come back to this. But just a few days ago, Colonel Mark Hall, the state police, the head of the state police, put out a very heartfelt announcement regarding the really the suicide that Sergeant Brian J. Ross, 19-year veteran of the New Hampshire State Police, took his life. And he began his career as a patrol trooper in Troop A and went on to many, many important or leadership roles, including the Major Crime Unit, Special Events Response Team. That would be, what that is, SWAT, Motorcycle Unit. He served as the commander of another analysis and reconstruction unit. And the colonel, very fitting or very appropriately said, state police remind anyone struggling with a mental health crisis, that help is available. Anyone can call or text a suicide crisis lifeline at 988 and talk to someone in person. And for veterans, you can hit 1, by the way, if you're a veteran suffering a mental health episode, but 988. And I'm going to just maintain that in our society, I said this on my Make 12 Hours Count for Veterans Count Day and beyond, mental health is the number one health issue. Everyone people can talk about diabetes and heart attacks and cancer, strokes. Mental health, anxiety, stress, depression is the number one by far, hundreds of miles ahead of anything else. It affects more families at all ages, all stages. And this is another example. And Jennifer Vaughn was on recently, WMUR. Her book is out with the Aucoin family, If You're Okay, about their son, who was also a leader in the New Hampshire State Police years ago, Marine veteran who succumbed in PTSD and took his own life. And that book, the timing of Jennifer's book is remarkable, and we'll have her on this week to talk about it. But Colonel Hall acknowledges, the struggling of mental health, first responders, veterans, soldiers, PTSD. These are very powerful forces, metaphysically inside a person, chemically, physically, emotionally. These are very powerful, and depression is very real. And we don't talk enough as a society about it. But that number 988, and the colonel references in his announcement, 988, in our society, as I said before my show, young kids can even tell you if they're home babysitting or home playing, and, a grandparent falls and hurts themselves. A young kid, 9 years old, knows about 911, because so many people have this smart thing in our hands and they know 911. But how many people, why don't we broadcast and tell more people, and why don't more people have memorized 988 for a mental health episode at 2 a.m? Doesn't matter, Sunday night, Monday night, a holiday. 988 is staffed by people to help people in a mental health episode, a crisis moment with mental health, or a loved one calling. 988. We don't really have that hammered into our nomenclature in society, and we should. And I think the colonel's statement and handling of this, and really thoughts and prayers to this veteran of the state police. Veteran meaning how many years? I think 19 years, taking his life. And, to the Ross family and to all the other, the state police have made great progress working with NAMI and people like Russ Conti, who I'm sure is heartbroken because his role now. And we just had Trooper Seth Garr on my show a week or so ago, Thursday, when we were live at Market Days, and he works full time on this. It must be very hard to lose one of their own like this. And of course, this person's family. So thoughts and prayers go out, but really 988, more people need to know that. All right, we're going to take a break. We'll see if Doug Tengden concurs with Stephen Janot, Bank of America, on the Fed and inflation taking a bite out of people's pockets and wallets. Next on The Pulse.
News, Live from the New England College Studios. Now, back to Jack on the Pulse of New Hampshire.
All right, Doug Tengden, World Market Advisors, worldmarketadvisors.com. Great partner, sponsor, and our local economic expert. And Doug, I hope you had a tremendous July 4th weekend and beyond. How are you?
I'm great. I'm great, Jack, and happy 250th to the greatest investment project of all time in the United States of America.
Yeah, thank God. I agree. Doug, we had Stephen Janot on, Bank of America, one of the senior economists for global research for all of Bank of America Thursday, just one-on-one like I do with you, just a discussion about the economy. And I recall at the end of last year and the beginning of this year and the last time he was on, the narrative was despite the war in Iran, despite higher oil and gas prices and that, the American consumer is resilient and spending was still keeping pace with inflation. In other words, 4% up on consumer spending, 4% up on inflation. But he said this time on Thursday that the Federal Reserve, even with the new chairman, is likely to raise rates 3 times between now and the end of the year for a total of 0.75% increase, which admittedly will put cold water on the economy to slow down inflation and not be good for a very unaffordable housing market, of course, if mortgages and borrowing gets more expensive. But he said the Fed will do it to slow things down, but he never mentioned the R word, no discussion at all of a recession. But it was a little bit of a shift that this year is taking its toll in terms of how expensive everything is. Do you concur with that or do you not concur? And you're free to, I mean, you're who you are.
Well, thanks, Jack. Yeah, no, I don't agree with 3 rate increases. The consensus is for 1 rate increase, which, by the way, was a big shift from the consensus was prior to call it 3 months ago, was for 2 rate cuts. I think it's far more likely. My expectation is the Fed's going to do nothing. They're just going to sit there. What the Fed thinks, and they're the ones who control it, the Fed on their dot plot called for effectively 1 rate increase, but half of the Fed said that they don't want to do anything. They don't see anything happening between now and the end of the year. So Bank of America put it out there. They're kind of an outlier call that gives them some headlines. And I think Stephen Janot is a good analyst, and he's well respected in the industry. But no, I think that's a bit out there.
So, are we plodding along consumer confidence, consumer spending, or as we get into the fall, are people pulling back a little bit? I mean, where's Doug Tengden at on this?
Well, I think we're largely as we have been, which is this K-shaped economy, where some people are doing okay, and those are the folks with the extra funds and have significant investments and are able to pull from those investments and are pushing the prices higher along Rye Beach, where I know you like to hang out, Jack.
No parking. There's no parking, and it's tough to get over that. I'm good.
And then there's come on up to the mountains. It only got up to 87 degrees here this weekend. That was our high. But then there's the general economy where folks are really kind of struggling, and the affordability is a significant issue.
Yeah.
And why do we have gas at $4 a gallon again? And why do we have real estate prices where we can't see them? And why is the rent going up one more time? And so there's all kinds of issues there where the economy is not doing as well.
Yeah. I just have to laugh. Just say over the weekend at some point I was getting some good, I guess either Asian or Chinese food takeout just for 2. And I enjoy certain vegetables and all that, and certain good places I like. And typically, the reason why I'm going here is typically you and I know that if you go and get Chinese food takeout or whatever it is, usually that's a very affordable thing to do. And it's usually if you get 2 people and an appetizer and all that, it might be, with a tip, if you get a cold beer or something or a drink or a beverage, it might be, give me a minute, it would be under $50. I think you'd agree with that, right? That's why a lot of people get, they like Chinese takeout because it's affordable, right?
Right.
Well, I got news for you. Even that is getting more expensive. if you get an app or two and a couple of the dishes, I just noticed that the old $8.95s are now $15.95, or the old, pan-fried dumpling. And I'm not picking on Chinese food here. That's not what I'm doing, because I love it. Pan-fried dumpling used to be like $5.95. Now it's $10.95. So I've even seen a doubling, Doug, in Chinese takeout, which is interesting when you start seeing it across the board, not just going grocery shopping and buying chicken breast or a strip steak. Almost a doubling, it feels like, of food prices. And I know it's probably not that high, but that's what it feels like.
Well, that's the heritage of 4% inflation versus 2% inflation. We had a couple of decades of 2% inflation, and it felt like prices just didn't change. And then we had a series of years where 4% inflation or more hit us, and that almost seemed to double the prices, and it got into wages. And now we have a much higher cost basis, and that you're absolutely seeing something that's real, Jack.
Yep.
I will say this: there are prospects for things moving lower, for the being disrupted. The idea of ghost kitchens, which my hometown put the kibosh on the use of real estate for something like that. But some entrepreneur somewhere is going to use a ghost kitchen to fund all kinds of startups, and we'll get on the other side of this. I think technology and innovation will be the solution.
Right, thank you. Doug Tengden, worldmarketadvisors.com. Top of the 10 o'clock. Anna Brown, Citizens Count on this Monday. Back right after this.